Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today we're taking a look at a budget Kershaw, and this is one from last year that interested me that I just didn't get my hands on. So I'm finally getting a chance to take a look at it and share it with you guys. And there were a couple of things that kind of drew me to this knife. One, there's some interesting details here that I kind of appreciate. There's also an interesting lock mechanism. And of course, Matt Diskin is the designer on this, and I'm a bit of a Matt Diskin fan. I really like his Vulcan mid-tech, as well as the Fire, which is an auto that he does that's really, really cool. Anyway, this knife in particular is appealing to me for a couple of reasons. You know, I like the Wharncliffe blade. I like the design here. And so I wanted to go ahead and check it out. And of course, I think I mentioned the lock bar is kind of an interesting method that they've used to get that lock bar to happen. So we'll take a look at that when we get to sort of the lockup and deployment portion of our discussion. For starters though, let's give you size and weight, which is 7 and 5/8 overall. Blade length here is going to be 3 and 5/16. The closed length, or the handle length, however you want to phrase that, is going to be 4 and 5/16. In terms of grip area, you're basically dealing with about half an inch less than that. So about 3 3/4 inches, a little bit more than that maybe. And I find I get a fine 4-finger grip on this knife. In terms of, oh yeah, I guess I should mention the weight here. The weight is 4.6 ounces. Now, in terms of how this carries, I will say this carries very, very comfortably. It's slim, the clip is fairly deep, and because of those things, I find it works really, really nicely in pocket. Now, it's at 4.6 ounces. Yeah, that's fairly heavy, especially for a knife of this size. But unless you're wearing, I don't know, linen or, you know, some kind of swimming trunks or workout pants or something like that, I don't think this weight is going to be a problem for anybody, unless you just wear like nothing but workout pants every day all the time. And in that case, you know, you're extremely limited to what knives you can carry well anyway. So actually this one would work well, but we'll get back to that when we talk about comparisons. Moving on to the blade here. So the blade on this guy is a Wharncliffe style blade. You can see it's got that gray coating on it, and the coating has held up pretty well. But I feel like I have to say this every time I have a coated blade, and it's true. Any coated blade is going to show wear eventually, right? Eventually you're going to be cutting a box and you're going to hit a staple and put a giant scratch across this. You're going to be, you know, cutting something, you know, you're going to cut through something hard, or you're going to be cutting near a stone and you're going to scrape the stone a little bit, or even just a bunch of cardboard or something will eventually wear that coating down. So if that's going to be a problem for you, then avoid coated blades. That's one of the reasons I generally avoid coated and bead blasted blades, because both of them show that kind of wear worse than a stone washed blade or a satin finished blade. And of course, out of all those, my favorite is definitely a satin blade. So that's one detraction that I do have. Otherwise though, the function of this blade is quite good. It's nice and thin behind the edge. It's a very high flat grind. The blade stock itself is not all that thick. And so you put those things together and you've got a knife that actually slices pretty nicely. So I've got to give, you know, well, I'm not in love with the coating. The performance of this blade is quite good. Of course, it is HCR13 MOV. And like I've often said about HCR13 MOV, it's not a great steel, but at this price point, you can pretty much expect to see it from Kershaw and CRKT. I wish they would switch to 14C28N, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. So we kind of have to deal with this if you like the design. And here's what I would say. If you like this design, if you find this interesting, I don't think HCR13 MOV steel should put you off, because it's going to be more than adequate for the vast majority of the population. You're not going to, you know, I don't know. Anyway, I know a lot of you are going to disagree with me in the comments about that, and that's totally fine. You know, if you don't want to buy HCR13 MOV steel, more power to you. I'm not in love with it either, but I won't try to argue that I just use my knife so much that it's actually inadequate for my uses. I think that's, you know, kind of talking out of your rear end. So that's the blade. I don't love it, or I mean, I don't hate it. I don't love the steel, but otherwise, the blade has performed for me very, very well. Moving on to action. So this is a KVT flipper, and you know, it actually has pretty decent action on it. It deploys very, very quickly. It's not drop shut. Well, I guess it kind of is, but the lock bar puts a little bit of pressure on that blade. And so I can, as you can see, it'll drop shut now, but once I take my finger off the lock bar, I do have to finish the job with my finger. Thinking of the lock bar, let's take a look at that, since that's one of the interesting things about this knife, rather than, well, let me open it so you can kind of see inside as well. So here's the outside, there's the inside. So you can see what they've done is they've cut out a portion from the middle of the handle, which is kind of an interesting idea. And then they've attached the lock bar to that so that, you know, obviously this wouldn't reach the tang of the blade, but they've just put sort of an extension on there. You can see the two screws, one there under the clip and the other one up there, that attach that lock bar that goes up to the blade face. It is fairly accessible, okay, but you can see the blade's pretty thin and the lockup is a little past 50%. Let me see if I can show you. That does mean that, you know, I don't have any problem getting access to it, but I would have liked it to be maybe just a little earlier on the lockup. Not so much because I'm afraid of the longevity of this knife. Honestly, at this price point, I don't really care, but more because it would be easier to get my finger to sort of be able to access that lock bar. All right, so lockup and deployment is quite good. The flipper tab is pretty comfortable. Now it's very small, and so with any small flipper tab, you may need to get used to it a little bit. If you're used to, you know, something that's a little more, this is not a big flipper tab either, but it just has a little more direct purchase for your finger. If you're used to something like that and you're switching out to this sort of little nub, it may take a little bit of effort, but it's actually quite nice. And I think the trade-off, which is having less of a flipper tab extending here, is kind of a nice thing. So in terms of action, I find this knife to be actually pretty well done. Again, this is a budget Kershaw, so my expectations weren't all that high. I've had some bad experiences recently, and so the fact that this guy is doing as good of a job as it is, you know, I've got to say I'm fairly happy about that. Finally, let's talk about the handle, both the construction and the ergonomics. So this is, of course, a stainless steel handle. They've done the same gray coating in all the recesses there, and then satin on the flats. There's a couple of cool things though. Number one, I like the way that they've done this little detail on the show side of the pivot screw here. So on this side, it's just a torque screw, but on the show side, they've done this nice little sort of angular pivot screw that's kind of attractive. They've also done something else here that I really like, and that is on the pocket clip, which is just a typical Kershaw deep carry clip. And I do like the way they've done this. I find these clips to be very, very functional, although maybe not that pretty. Over here, they've got a nice space holder for it, which again is a nice touch that I do appreciate. Backspacer here is, I would have liked to see standoffs on this, but it's not the end of the world. And if you take a close look, you can see, come on, focus on the knife, not my fingers. There we go. So you can see that this is some kind of FRN rather than G10 or metal of any kind. And there's a bit of texturing back here. In hand, the knife actually feels really good. Now it's a little smaller than I like, but you can see I still get a good 4-finger grip. You know, in a hammer grip, it works fine. Saber grip is very nice. And this is how I pretty much always use this knife, in a saber grip. So I don't really have any complaints about that. The lock bar, no, not the lock bar. The pocket clip doesn't create any kind of a hot spot for me, so I do appreciate that. And so there you go, guys. That's my sort of rundown on the way they put this together and on how it functions in use. I'm actually fairly happy with this knife. Now, I do want to give you some comparisons here, because there are a lot of knives in this price point or close to this price point that you may want to take a look at. If you're looking for sort of a budget flipper, you know, I've got this guy from QSP is fairly well done and probably just a little bit cheaper, available on Amazon.com. I don't know, guys, about Amazon.ca. By the way, I will put the knives that I use for comparison, as well as this knife. I'll make sure that I put Amazon links down below so you can find those for yourself. Next here, we've got a Toya knife, and this is the Bruiser. Again, a really nice budget flipper. The steel is going to be a little better on this one, and I think you're going to pay just a little bit more for that as well. More closer, let's say a little closer in size is going to be the Kershaw Knockout, which is a fantastic knife one of my favorite, actually, you know what, forget that. This is my favorite Kershaw without a doubt. And this is using the sub frame lock, which again is kind of an interesting variation on a frame lock. Very close in size, as you can see. This one's just a little bigger, a little more comfortable in hand because of that slightly larger size. And of course, we're missing the Wharncliffe blade. I've got a Kaiser Corto here, and I wanted to bring this one in because it's similar in size. And the thing that I love about the Corto is that you still get 3.5 inches of blade on a smaller knife. Really, really attractive looking knife. And of course, very, very different price points here, but I thought I'd go ahead and share it because if you're really interested in this, but you'd like something a little higher end, I know a lot of you will be looking at this going, yeah, it's not, I don't like the materials. I don't like, you know, I'd like to spend a little bit more. You can find these Cortos on sale for some pretty decent prices right now if you spend some time shopping around the old interwebs. Let's throw up a Rat Model 1 here, primarily for size comparisons. You guys, you know, everyone's kind of familiar with a Rat Model 1, and so that'll give you a sense for how big the deadline is. And finally, I brought in this rake a minute ago, and I'll bring it in again. If you're looking for a budget Wharncliffe that's small and lightweight, this thing is incredible. It really, really is. So I think, again, probably a little bit more expensive, but not a whole lot more. And it'll all depend on personal preference, what you think of all of those different designs that I've showed you. One last knife, and that is, for size comparison, the Cold Steel 4MAX. All right, moving on. What do I think of this knife? Is it any good? Should you go out and buy it? Well, here's my overall take, guys. This is a budget Kershaw, and for what you pay, I'm fairly impressed with some of the little details here. I do like the design. I do like the blade shape. It's comfortable in hand, and it carries very well. So those are all the things that I like. Couple detractions. I will say I'm not in love with the coated blade. I would have been happier with a satin blade. And of course, I don't like the steel. It would be great to see Kershaw to switch to the, you know, the budget-friendly D2 that's coming out of China right now. Or even better would be 14C28N. If this was 14C28N, which by the way, all Kershaws used to be, that used to be the Kershaw steel. And it's really sad that they've kind of stopped doing that. I'm sure it was about cost. But anyway, it would definitely improve their knives if they went back to using the 14C28N. Although the truth is, you know, the vast majority of their Walmart customers would not know the difference. So that's why you're likely not going to see it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will talk to you soon.